have thought about giving an AI agent all my podcast episodes and all my online content, and it making an AI agent from it. So when everyone types in, like, Oliver, why is it that my kid is getting bullied, but he's a leader, and we're supposed to believe that being an individual in life is the best thing, and it will give the answer. And it's like, if everyone's going to start doing that, there's going to be so much choice to choose from, and because there's no personal connection and it's just another agent, then everyone's going to flick between one agent to the other, and then eventually they'll realize that there's something missing. This hole in them isn't being filled.
They had, one view of autism, that, they had behavioral issues, learning issues, all of these things. And actually, when I had this awakening in this reading, it really opened up my mind to it's not really an issue. It's not a disability. It's just a difference on how they see the world and how they connect to source, getting that in my brain and kind of processing it and integrating it and making peace with it.
When you get us talking, or someone who's neurodiverse talking, we don't shut the fuck up, right? The reason why we don't talk is because we have the information and we don't need to say it. Whereas people that aren't heard or don't have the information they need will just talk to try and find the information. Because we already have it, we don't need to. We can just meditate and sit quietly on our own in the corner and be happy. Just quickly, I just want to say a massive thank you to everyone who still listens to the podcast. I started 4 years ago, and since then I've had over 1 million downloads. I get 5,000 downloads per month, and I've had over 200 different guests. So a massive thank you to everyone who still listens. If you could please do me a favour, if you could rate and review the podcast, that will be amazing, because it helps get the podcast out to new, conscious people like yourself. And my goal is to awaken as many people around the world. You can also follow me on Instagram. It's YesKingOliver, should you wish to see what I get up to on my day-to-day moments. Back to the episode. So before this podcast, I decided to put my pink hat on. And that is because when you see something online and it stands out, it gives people more of an interest to look at it. And nowadays, everything online looks all the same. You can tell that an Instagram reel is scripted. You can tell a thumbnail is just going to be nonsense and it's just trying to reel you in. And these days, to stand out online, you have to be a completely different, because it's flooded with everyone following the same tricks and the same tips to get the same result, which is essentially engagement and clicks. So it's like, well, what do you do differently? And with everything now becoming AI and robotic and virtual, it's like the only way forward, I think, is to keep the human side, but then characterize the human side, as opposed to just doing everything online. Because as we start to go online and we lose touch with humans, we're going to start to want to be with humans. So you can't just have a YouTube channel speaking your voice that looks like you, reading your content. It's just not the same as seeing a real human doing it. So the people who know that can essentially get through this phase of humans losing their online presence and maintain it, because when everyone else gets bored, who will win? It's the human that stuck to its game, even though it wasn't maybe getting the most views in a quick amount of time.
Absolutely. I totally agree. And that is one thing that I've noticed, is that more people are and especially since COVID, people are more so looking for the human side, and vulnerability in being human. It's more accepted nowadays, and that's what people are actually looking for, to have that connection with somebody, even if it's through a Instagram reel or a YouTube video or a YouTube short. They want to see human being versus this plastic person or fake person that has kind of been built up in our society for a long time. That's one thing that I've really noticed. And I actually have been kind of focusing that on like my reels and my podcasts and stuff like that, is just kind of letting the human side flow, because it's more engaging and it's more interesting, and it really, like I said, builds that connection not only with your audience but also like for me, like future like clients. They feel more comfortable going into a session with me, because they already have seen who I am. They've heard my voice, how I speak. So I totally agree. Like being human is so much more important now than it ever was. And a lot of people focus on being perfect and, scripted and well put together. That's not fun anymore.
It's like I have thought about giving an AI agent all my podcast episodes and all my online content, and it making an AI agent from it. So when everyone types in, like, Oliver, why is it that my kid is getting bullied, but he's a leader, and we're supposed to believe that being an individual in life is the best thing, and it will give the answer. And it's like, if everyone's going to start doing that, there's going to be so much choice to choose from, and because there's no personal connection and it's just another agent, then everyone's going to flick between one agent to the other, and then eventually they'll realize that there's something missing. This hole in them isn't being filled. And then, for example, there'll have people like you and me that are just being hustling in the background whilst everyone else is making a quick buck overnight. That disappears, and then we're gradually making like a buck a day extra, and then people come back to us realizing, oh, I actually connect with a human being more than I do with an agent. And then we go up because now there's less humans out there, because everyone's now run over to the AI agents. And that's what I call, if you're a gazelle queuing up to get food from a swamp, if there's a long queue, don't bother even queuing. Just presume that by the time you get there, the swamp's dried up. Go over there and get the first dibs on that lake. And that's just herd mentality, where you don't want to be in the herd. When it gets a little bit busy, time to go. And that's how you'll always stay ahead of the game.
Absolutely. And I think a part of that too is, people using like ChatGPT, AI, stuff like that to, get information. That's great, shorthand. But like you said, they do then circle back around to people like us who are trying to be like authentic, for the sole fact that human connection, first of all, and secondly, because we've gone through, we have that unique human experience that AI doesn't have. We have the ability to connect, to hold the space for a person that needs space held, to give that compassion and empathy when it's needed, some advice when it's not, when it's needed, or when it's not and they don't want it. I think that is yeah, that is super, super interesting. Like I never really thought of it that way. So that's really, really interesting. And that popped into my head was, yeah, they're really craving that experience, because how many times, when you're going through something as, like a young adult, and you come across something and you're like, oh crap. Like I really want to pick my mom's brain about that. I think she went through something similar. You really then gravitate towards people who've had that experience, who can help you and give you their advice and what happened to them. And then you can take what resonates and leave what doesn't. I think that's super, super important for everybody. And that, yes, ChatGPT and AI can be a useful tool, but I think it should be used as such, just a tool, not your everyday go to fill in the gaps.
So what came to me was, obviously I started this conversation just plucking it out of thin air, and it's led to this. And I know that you wouldn't have planned this conversation. You wouldn't have probably maybe even really thought about the topic too much, but you were able to talk freely on the spot with what was coming to mind based on a generalized thought system on this topic. So if you go to an agent, every agent will fart out the same answer in the same time. Whereas watching a human being unravel in real time a question that someone else has just asked is that human experience, that resonance, that compassion, the empathy, the understanding, the fact that they're taking time to really dissect your question and then take their time to answer it. And that's a human experience, which no agent can really do. And the same as, you know, a baby needs to look up at his mother in her arms to get familiar with, okay, this is the person that's going to protect me, this is my mum, this is my safe space. Whereas, you know, having loads of agents there doing this, for example, is basically shipping the baby around the village, where it's with all these people, and it's like, well, who's going to keep me safe? Like who's the main one? And we need that connection with at least one person that can give us that thing that we need when we need it. And agents are just going to be all the same. That is it. And that's what makes human experiences and connections different. It's those unique bonds between people.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I love that. And and I think it's so, coming back to you know, kind of shipping, you know, the baby around the village too. I find it so interesting too that you know, something that I've heard a lot in my life is, you know, it takes a village
I
to
knew you
raise
were
a
going to say
child.
that. I was waiting for it, and the religion
Yep.
did it.
Yep. And in some, I agree to a certain point that, you know, we do need a village, quote unquote, to raise a child. But I don't think it's as important as a lot of people put emphasis on, I guess. Because yes, like we as adults, or the you know, we need people to fill our cups, that we can you know, fill the baby's cup and be that safe space. But I think in today's day and age, I don't think we put enough emphasis on the parent being that safe space for a child. Because I think, well, at least for me growing up, you know, I was kind of a latchkey kid where, you know, oh, you come home from school, you do all your own things, you have to be independent, you have to, you know, be nice and kind to everybody and be friends with everybody. And I've noticed with my children, I've, you know, kind of flipped that script, and I'm like, and another big one too that I was taught was, you know, being selfish is a bad thing. And with my children, like, yes, I like having, you know, people that I can be like, hey, you want to go spend the weekend at grandma and grandpa's? You know, want to go spend the weekend at auntie's and spend time with them. You know, they're kind of my village. But I've noticed that my children grow more and learn more in our home, from our dynamics in the home, and really having one-on-one time with them in a safe space for them has been the most important. And they learn the most. Because like with my daughter, she actually came home from school quite a while ago, and she was kind of upset. And I was like, oh, you know, what's wrong? And at first she didn't want to tell me. And I was like, you know, you can tell me anything. I'm here to listen to you. I'm not going to judge you. And really, really emphasizing that no judgment, safe space for her. And then she opened up, and, you know, listening was super important, but then also like reaffirming some misconceptions, I guess, is the best way that I can describe it. Because she was upset because one of her friend, or one of the little kids at school, she's not a fan of, she's not, you know, she's not a really good friend of hers. She was being mean to her, and she's really upset about it. And I said, well, what about this makes you upset? And she goes, well, my teacher said that I have to be friends with everybody, but I really don't want to be friends with her because she's not really a nice person to me. She doesn't treat me well. And I looked at her, and I was, and this kind of goes back to the village, where the teacher would be part of the village. And I looked at her and I said, you know, not that I want to say that anybody's ever wrong, but I very much disagree with her statement of you having to be friends with everybody. You absolutely do not have to be friends with everybody. You have the autonomy and to say no, because you are not responsible for the other girl's feelings. You should not take that on as a person. I said, however, you don't have the responsibility to be her friend if you do not want to be. You don't have to do what you don't want to do, but you do have the responsibility to be kind and respectful to everybody. And I saw her face just kind of like, the wheels were turning, and it really opened up for her that sense of autonomy, responsibility, that yes, even though I have to respect everybody, I don't have to be their friend. And then I kind of saw like this little rebellious side where her thoughts started changing from what she thought was true was a limiting belief, and that there was other options out there for her outside of the box. So I think creating a safe space at home is much more important than the quote unquote village for everybody as well, if that makes sense.
It makes perfect sense. So back in the day, you could say that there was like, say, 50 families in the village, same postman, same milkman, same church, same shop. There was no TVs, no radios. Well, there was radios. There was no social media. So the only thing people really would do is play in the street with the same people, maybe visit the same cow on the same farm, and everyone's doing the same thing. So everyone knows the same thing. Your uncle and your dad and your brother and your cousin and the neighbor and your neighbor's brother and the neighbor's dad, they pretty much all know and think the same, because all they've seen in their village is what's in their village. So they could go to any different person and sort of get the same advice, because their grandparents probably lived in the same village and they all taught each other and they grew up with each other. These days, you've got millions of cultures and opinions online that you go to one person, it's going to be different from your best friend, because they could have been growing up in another country, had different grandparents, they watched different shit to you, they went to a different type of school. So when you would say to your daughter, you don't have to be friends with them and hang out with them, but be kind and civil with them, someone else who might have had a shitty upbringing might be like, yeah, fuck them, just don't talk to them, don't be friends with them, or just ignore them, be rude. Like, so that's a difference in opinion based on what their village taught them. So it would work years ago, it doesn't work anymore. And my dad, for example, gave me one-on-one attention until I was, basically I'm 30, still does that now. All I've had is him, and that's all I ever needed and had. The problem is that because other people my age didn't have that, I now had all this information that other kids didn't, and then they started to not want to be around me because I had something that they didn't have, which was love and family and strength and confidence, that now I'm older, obviously I win and it doesn't affect me anymore. But back then it was very hard when you've got someone like my dad saying, okay, don't have to be friends with them, but be civil and be nice and polite. And I'm like, well, why? They're not friends with me. So yeah, having that one person to reaffirm the actual right information is crucial, because imagine if they had another parent saying, yeah, you just ignore them and like block them and stop looking at them, and you're saying, oh, don't be friends with them, but at least be civil, then your kid's going to get confused. And that's when I went into my head of having the outside world say this, my dad's saying this, and I was constantly analyzing everything every fucking day based on what he said and based on what outside society said, and I had to basically come to a conclusion of who is right. And it was just, I wanted to die. It was just too much information. So having clarity is very important from one person.
Yeah, absolutely. And my son is actually going through that right now. My daughter, she's 9, and my son is 12, and he's a little bit different because he's on the autism spectrum. So the way that he sees and processes information is so much more different from my quote unquote neurotypical daughter, who, she gets it. It's hard for her to execute those things, which it's hard for any child. But for him, yeah, I have to completely approach it differently, because he's like, oh, yes, school says one thing and then you say the other. What's right? I don't understand. And then add an additional factor of it being an abstract, non-tangible concept for him. The struggle is real. So I totally understand, that. And it's so hard. And I think life for our kids at this point in our society, in the world, is so hard because they have access to so much information at all the time, on top of people from our generation who have kind of grew up with the viewpoint of the village, and then expanding our minds as we got access to more people and more information.
Yeah,
it's just it's just crazy at the, like, and it's so hard for even like me and myself to navigate. And then, you know, like I said, for my kids, like I said, it's a little bit easier for my daughter to understand, more difficult for her to execute, because of her age and her sensitivities. But then for my son, it's so abstract, and he just doesn't know which way is up, which is, it's interesting. It's interesting to navigate as a parent as well. So kind of seeing the opposite side, like you were seeing from the child's perspective, like what's right, what's, you know, which way is up. And from a parent, I'm like, oh my God, I see it. And how do I guide that? How do I ease a transition? How do I explain it better? You know?
Yes, I had Tourette's growing up, so I was in my head my whole life, and you know, pretty much ADHD, autism, OCD. It's how the brain is. I've probably got bits of all of it, but not extreme version of one or the other. But these days, you know, autism has gone from like one in 100 to 1 in 20 or something like that. So if you think about, and ADHD and Tourette's and OCD, like I knew nobody with Tourette's growing up, yeah, and autism. I don't think there's anyone in my class with autism. There was a few dyslexics, but that seems to be like outdated now. Like who's dyslexic anymore, right? So
Right.
when I think about, you know, how back in my day there was only few people different like me. Now there's like every fucker's got something wrong with them. So what's the common denominator between my day, 10, 15 years ago, and now? It's we have access to so much information that there's not just yin or yang, black and white, up or down. It's up or down. Have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? It's male or female, transgender, binary, fucking fluid, penguin. Like there's millions. And so now there's like kids have so much choice. They're like, what the fuck do I do? Where do I go? And then you become numb. You can't express yourself because like, where do you even start? And then you've got other people out there with also millions of variables that will now create conflict when you even talk to somebody about up or down. Because if they're like, well, no, there's left and right and up and down, then you're going to argue. And then we don't like arguing. We can't face criticism and rejection anymore. So we go inwards. And so now we never get that clarity that we would have otherwise got. When you ask somebody, Mum, can you just confirm, is this right or wrong? She called me a twat. Is that nice? No, it's not nice, but you don't have to respond. Okay, thanks very much, and that's it. Now it's call them this, or don't do that, or pop their tires, or put shit in their lunchbox. And there's just so much other stuff that they've seen online, seen on social media, other people's opinions and perspectives based on what they've seen. And now it's like, well, what is autism? I believe, from my personal experience, that autism is when someone who's highly in tune, highly sensitive, highly conscious is in their head already. They're already very in tune, and outside who are not in tune live life a certain way. And because you live life with source, it is constantly a contradiction to what's in your head. So you stay in your head and you don't develop social skills, communication skills like normal kids do, because they're not in their head. They're just out saying whatever comes out and then dealing with it. And so the autism kid goes in their head trying to get clarity. So why is everyone these days, why is it 1 in 20 autism? I believe it's because as we are raising our consciousness and the outside is becoming more cluttered and more full of bollocks, that we are forcing to go within and becoming, quote unquote, autistic, right? And all that really is listening to your own voice in your head, your own consciousness, your own soul, God, your own body, and not the external world. That is it. That's my opinion.
Oh, I agree 100%. And it's really, really interesting. So on my like awakening journey, which is super, super fast tracked, I think it started, oh my God, we're in 2025 already. I think it was April of 2023, right when COVID was kind of going away. I got dragged to a holistic wellness fair. And then long story short, I ended up getting an Akashic Records reading, and then went down this rabbit hole, because she told me in the Akashic Records reading that I was, oh my God, what the fuck did she say? An ET soul. And I looked at her and I was like, what the fuck is that? Like, I had no idea. And I'm like, what? That doesn't even make sense to me. So when I left the fair, my mind was blown. I went on a Google search, which, by the way, ET soul is not a good Google term. but I did come across the term starseed. Googled that, got a lot of information, kind of the same thing, like what way is up, because there's so much information once you find what you're looking for. There's so much information. So I was like, how do I make heads or tails of this? So I found another Akashic Records reader who had a podcast. I binge listened to her podcast. Things were resonating and landing with me. So I went to her. I asked my questions, and then I asked about my son, because he had been having a lot of like issues, behavioral issues, authority issues, just us clashing all the time. And I was like, oh my God, like what can I do to make our relationship better? What can I do to help him? And in this reading, she went into his records, and she said, oh my gosh, he waited for you. Like he chose you to be his mom because you were going to, put in the effort. You were going to be the one to help him understand himself, help him understand the world. And I was like, well, what the fuck does that mean? I don't even know the world. I'm only 34. I don't know shit. Still, I don't know shit. And it really opened up my eyes, seeing, because I had, one view of autism that, they had behavioral issues, learning issues, all of these things. And actually, when I had this awakening in this reading, it really opened up my mind to it's not really an issue. It's not a disability. It's just a difference on how they see the world and how they connect to source. And then after like getting that in my brain and kind of processing it and integrating it and making peace with it, or I should say understanding it better, then I really started looking at him and approaching things differently, asking him different questions, asking like more spirituality questions, more like, okay, what are you hearing? What are you seeing? What are you experiencing, so that I can understand it better, really taking a different approach. And it was so interesting to see him open up in a different way and share his experiences. And as that started to grow and that relationship kind of got restructured, is like, I guess, the best term, he actually started developing different gifts as well, like hearing things that, and this is in his terms, is hearing things that other people can't hear, knowing things that other people don't know. And I was like, oh my God. And then I took a class to learn quantum hypnosis, to kind of access, those deeper parts of the subconscious mind, past lives, stuff like that. I haven't done it with him yet, just because he's not ready to, which is okay. But I'm experiencing those things for other people. I'm so excited to finally get there with him and really help him develop those gifts and learn what they are and his different connections. And yeah, really. So yeah, I'm totally with you. Sorry, that was a long-winded explanation, but I'm totally with you that these autistic children that are coming in are really a product of the work that Earth is doing right now to raise our consciousness, connect together spiritually, really, really just raise everything. And they're here to foster it and help, and they just connect differently.
So essentially, an autistic person is a chat GDP AI agent. So imagine that AI agents collect information that humans have learned from learning over time, right? And they put it online. An autistic person works it out themselves in their head. So there's no one to ask. They don't need to ask anybody because they've got enough information to work everything out. Like everything links to something eventually. Language is all part of the same energy. Once you kind of know the language, you can get anywhere you want. Growing up, I understood and analyzed the world and knew everything at like such a young age to the nth degree that I didn't need to speak to anybody. I understood life so early and I had all the information I needed, to the point where I couldn't speak to anybody because their conversations would just be nothing like mine. And so what I found was that I'm not going to speak about your nonsense about football because I'm on about, real life shit. And as a result of being different, you start just working out more shit. And therefore, I realize information doesn't end. So you become superhuman, super autistic, super Tourette's, where you're twitching like mad, which is just brain activity going berserk. Something else you said. So from my experience, right, having my dad feed me so much information at such a young age did me harm at that age. Not in general life, because I made it. I did want to die at one point. So, for example, if you did the hypnosis thing with your kid at 12 years old, and he knows about his potential past lives and all of this shit at 12, and all the other kids are just playing with Action Man, he's going to become so out of sync with his class that he's going to be even more of an alien. Like I was at school, I was even more of an alien. The more I would speak to adults at family gatherings and barbecues, I'm like 15, I'm like 13, 14. I'm speaking to the 70-year-olds asking them questions about life and mortgage. All the other kids are just sort of running around the garden playing football. So what we are, we create more of. Who he is, he's only going to think more and become more of that. He's already a black sheep, nothing you can do. But I think to myself, imagine having access to information such as past lives at the age of 12, when most people, you could say, realize it when they're 40, 50, if they're lucky, what that will do to him in terms of being an evolved human being on this planet. And I say, if you get through the teenage part, you win. Unfortunately, some people who know this information at young age, they can't handle the pressure and they end up doing something silly, which is why, you know, I've always been scared to have kids and be like, would I want to teach him everything or not? Because if I do what my dad did to me and give him so much information, he's just going to be me again. But then at the same time, I can't have him just let society program his brain, because then it's going to be wrong. So it's like, well, how much do you give your kid? Do you tell him about past lives at 15 or 12 or 9 or 20? Like, what the fuck do you do? Because like, it's so complicated. It's so hard.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm kind of in the same boat with you where my parents didn't necessarily give me a lot of information. I was just a naturally curious kid, so I'd ask about everything and anything, and I'd work it out in my brain ahead of time too. But one thing that my dad always told me when we would sit down and have our little daily chats about, you know, well, what came up in the fucking world for you today? Well, let me tell you. One thing he always said was, I will never lie to you. And even growing up, like that was one thing that I knew that created a safe space with my dad, was that he, you know, if I asked a question, he would never lie to me. And that I passed that along to my kids too. And then he also taught me with that is never ask a question that you're not prepared for an answer that you don't want. I learned that very early. So, and that's the kind of relationship that I've fostered with my children too, that I'm like, okay, I will never lie to you. You can ask me anything. I will explain it to you within reason of your, you know, age appropriateness. And also to be prepared for answers that you might not want to get, you know, because I really do want them to be able to face that constructive criticism, to receive negative feedback and be okay with it and not be defensive or angry or, you know, be like, oh, well, you know, go fuck off, you know, because that's not really an appropriate socially acceptable response either. So with that, I actually, so my son wants to do the hypnosis stuff, but he actually came to me about it. I didn't bring it to him because in my, so I was trained in a couple different like hypnosis modalities, QHHT from Dolores Cannon, Beyond Quantum Healing, and a couple other ones, past life regression therapy, blah, 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 because I dove head first into all of the things all at the same time. It was great. But I noticed that a lot of the modalities really discouraged doing past life regression of any kind with children. And I thought that was really interesting. And the reasoning why was because, you know, you don't want to, they said that, you know, you don't want to let them, you don't want to overload them with information, right? Or have them access something that could alter the course of their life. But then on the flip side, part of that hypnosis is accessing the higher self. And one thing that they wanted us to, really understand and pass on to our clients, and people that we're helping, is not to be afraid of it, because our higher selves won't show us anything that we're not ready to see or experience. So I sat there and I'm like, okay, but now you're telling me two contradicting things. Because if, a child might, if our higher selves isn't going to let us see anything that we're not ready to see or that could harm us and it's not in our highest good, well, then what's the difference if they're age 18 or they're 12? So I was really pondering that. And while I was thinking about it, that's when my son kind of came through and was like, Mom, like, what do you do? What are you doing? Why are you sitting on a computer, for 2.5 hours, with someone laying on the couch on the screen? So that's when I kind of explained to him in a watered down version of what I do. And he's really interested in it, but he's also scared. He's like, I'm scared. Because I'm like, well, what scares you about it? I'm like, I genuinely want to know, and it's okay to tell me. He's like, well, what if I see something I don't want to see? Or what if I see something scary? Or what if I see myself die? And I'm like, it's okay to have that fear. Everybody has that fear. It's normal. I said, but if you're not ready to see it and you don't want to see it, you won't. They won't show it to you unless it is absolutely pivotal and necessary for you to see. I said, but whenever you're ready, we can explore it. Even just a mini session, a little half an hour, we can ease into it. It's not something you have to see right now. So he's really curious about it. And I think the way that it's approached is super, super pivotal too.
So to end, something else I was going to say is that, these days everyone is completely different, and sometimes our friends, we're completely different, but we connect over one thing, such as football, poetry, maybe yoga. And that really is all you need to have a friend, have a human connection. Just talk about the things that you have in common rather than argue about politics and religion and other shit that you don't have in common. So, for example, rather than say asking an autistic kid stuff that interests you, as you said, it's tell me what you thought about today. And they'll come out with like, holy shit, you thought about that today? And you're like, tell me more. And from experience, when you get us talking or someone who's neurodiverse talking, we don't shut the fuck up, right? The reason why we don't talk is because we have the information and we don't need to say it. Whereas people that aren't heard or don't have the information they need will just talk to try and find the information. Because we already have it, we don't need to. We can just meditate and sit quietly on our own in the corner and be happy. But because we're actually programming and processing the whole world differently, we've got more information than everybody. So saying, what do you think about today? What's your, like, what do you like about this? And then having them talk and then responding from that creates enormous dialogue. You probably get more of a conversation out of someone like that than an average normal person at work or at school who just talks about the same shit like they watched on Netflix and Fox News and stuff like that. So again, learning how to deal with people, how to work with them, learning the rapport for somebody. So for example, if I'm dealing with someone at work who is a pain in the ass, I will tell myself, okay, he's a pain in the ass. I will now let him take the lead so he feels heard. So he's not as controlling and defensive. So I'll just respond to him. Okay, what do you want me to do? And then naturally he feels like he feels like he's being heard, and then he just sort of surrenders. So adapting to the other person sometimes is a goldmine to find out how do you see it.
Yeah, absolutely. That is, and it's interesting, because the way you explain it is a much more excellent and eloquent version than I've ever explained it. Because yeah, I do the same shit at my job, just everyday life, and I've gotten really good at quote unquote reading the room or reading the person. That, and I don't know if that's like a trauma response or a neurodivergent response, probably a bit of both. Yep. Like I worked in a men's correctional facility for a while, and being a woman officer is hard just in general. But then in a men's facility is even more hard. But I learned how to and it's interesting because it's not even just with the inmates that made it hard. It was the other officers as well,
Yes.
especially the male ones. Ugh. 0 out of 10, do not recommend, don't do it. But I got really good at reading the room, at reading the person that I'm talking to know, am I in danger? Is this conversation going to get me into, because it could be even the simplest question, like, how was your day? I'm not answering that the way that you think I'm going to, because that can get me in so much trouble, whether it's an inmate or an officer. And same shit at my job. I have this one coworker who is just a bitch, and I'm just like, okay, yep, you do what you're gonna do, because if that's gonna make your day better, and I'll hold the space for you to be a bitch, that's completely fine. I don't care. But you do get so much more out of people, so much more information, and so much more experience by approaching it as, tell me more. What did you think of this? How did you experience that? What did you think of when they said that? How did that make you feel? I think it just opens up so much more, and it really practices our skills too, in communication and empathy and compassion and just understanding in general.
See, I've always it's like when I asked you the initial question and you hadn't really thought about it, but you knew enough to create a conversation rather than I'm like, but if, but well, what, okay, it made sense. So when you said how I explained it was so eloquently, that's because in the past I have analyzed in depth, obsessively about this topic, okay? Pros and cons, for and against, up and down. How does everyone see it? How do I see it? Why do I see it like I do it and they don't? I have all the questions answered. So growing up, I used to say, I've thought about everything. Okay. If you thought about it, I've already got an answer. I've already thought about it, because all I did was think. So because all I did was think, I don't think anymore. But the information is still there. So when I'm explaining, say, this situation, it just comes off the tongue because I've already thought about it, versus somebody who comes across this and they're like, that's interesting. Let me try and work it out. And they've got literally now rewrite a program from scratch where they will learn along the way. They'll read it back and realize, oh, I need to change that, edit that, move that. And then they may read it again and then it's perfect. And then they read it and then they learn how to read it better. And then people answer certain questions and they've answered it before. So they have the answer. And then it's like this, it's like how the brain adapts to any situation. And that comes from again, excessively thinking about why am I different? Again, you said, is it neurodiverse or is it trauma response? For me, it was both, because if I didn't understand why I was being bullied or why I didn't get invited to parties and why I didn't drink and everyone else is getting pissed, if I didn't have a reason to explain why actually I am normal, or just because they're not doing it doesn't mean I'm anything wrong. If I didn't have that answer, it will be, why am I like I am? I don't want to be here. But I had to find answers to justify, actually, when they get older, they're going to have a shitty, miserable life, and I'm going to have a great life because that's all that they've got, alcohol and whatever drugs. And so that's
Right.
like, okay, here's a reason to stay alive, because you win. So yeah, trauma response, making sure you have an answer next time. Like almost trying to beat the bully. You've got like a comeback in your sleeve,
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And on this awakening journey, I've learned that a lot of what I do is a trauma response. Like, and that's almost with anybody. And I forget who the hell I was talking to about trauma responses, and but I'm like, she's like, well, but not everybody has a trauma response, and I'm like, well, right, they might not to you, like, because she said that they didn't experience a trauma, so they shouldn't have a trauma response. And I was like, well, you might not think it's a trauma, but in their experience, that it was. Because everybody experiences things differently. Everybody has a different threshold for stress, for trauma, for sadness, for grief. Everybody has a different threshold, so everybody has a different experience. So you have to meet everybody where they're at. So it could still be a trauma response, even though if you don't deem it a trauma. I thought that was super, super interesting, that not many people think about that other people's thresholds are completely different.
Right. And on that note, is there anything else, anything you want to promote or plug before we finish?
Yes, if you want to listen to my podcast, it's Sarcy Journey on Spotify and Amazon, and you can also find me on Instagram. It's at inner_site_LLC. For some content, I'm kind of revamping things. I was on a hiatus for a hot minute because life was a shit show, but I'm starting to come back now.
And if you had one day left to live, what is the one thing that you would tell the rest of the world?
Change is inevitable, and get comfortable being uncomfortable.
Thanks for listening. If you like this episode, please remember to subscribe, turn the bell notifications on, like the episode, and comment below. And if you want to follow me on Instagram, it's YesKingOliver. Take a look at the other videos to your side. And if you just want to listen to this podcast, you can do so on Apple and Spotify and most other platforms by going to talkwitholiver.com.